Howdy, y'all. My name is Myers Raymer, and I'm an alcoholic. What a treat. It's funny. The fact that you would show up on Friday night is never really a surprise because it's kind of planned that way. The fact that after last night you would come back is always a treat. Always. I want to clear up a couple of things. We were talking to some cats a minute ago. Sometimes there's a misconception about the steps and about this timeliness with working through the steps. That people get the impression when we say quickly, they say they get the impression that we're trying to jam this stuff down somebody's throat, that we're going to sit on them and make them do it. There's nothing like that at all. It's just that the book seems to paint a picture as it begins, and then they use words like these action words, and that seem to build some momentum as you're going through the work. And so this has always been problematic in AA, where we'll start and then we want to stop and sit on something. Like we'll work step one and then we sit and we don't do anything else, and then we wait for things to chill. And the old guys in AA would say, well, they'll start again when they're ready. This is not true, guys. This is not what my experiences bore out. My experiences bore out is that if you back away from a young guy, a guy that's brand new, if you back away, they just get sick. You'll watch them. They'll be real enthusiastic, and then they'll just sort of wilt right there in front of you. And then you won't see them so much, and then you won't see them at all, and pretty soon you hear that they've gone back out again, and everybody uses that old lame thing that we were talking about last night. Well, they must not have wanted it bad enough. And I think that's a shame. I just think it's a tragedy when it gets like that. Yes, indeed, there are people that come and after they're set here a while decided they don't want what we have. I understand that. But I think it's much safer to go ahead and get them moving through the work and then let God get involved and let God go do His deal. It works sweet that way. When Chris was talking about this step one stuff, There's not a lot of time involved in this thing as a general rule. I mean, you're either ready to start doing what we do or you're not ready to do what we do. And either way, that decision will be yours. I'm not trying to insist that you do anything. But if you're ready to do that, the decision to go on and the decision to see this thing is the stuff that Chris was reading, that stuff on page 44 in our version of that book that he read. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, that stuff. It's two questions. It's two questions that lead us. It's two questions that leads us to yes or no answers. It's or and then you know where you stand. There's no reason to go any farther. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. You understand what I'm saying? But I think what's important to understand on this thing is at the end of that paragraph, I'm not sure how it translates in terms of your book, but at the end of that paragraph, after they ask you the two questions and you answer that, they make a statement, a declarative statement that Bill Wilson is famous for. And this is what he says: if that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness, they define it, an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. It's interesting, guys. I mean, it didn't say, you remember, Bill Wilson is pretty dogmatic about what he says. I mean, he's pretty direct. He doesn't beat around the bush. He says what he means, and he's not vague. There's not a lot of gray area in the big book. One of the things that we want to talk about today, and we want to make sure that everybody is clear on, is this idea of where the meeting fits into AA and recovery. It plays a role and it plays a part. We just got to clarify where it is and where it fits in. I think that if Bill Wilson had thought that the meeting was the most important things, at that statement he would have said, you may be suffering from an illness which only 90 meetings in 90 days will conquer. I think that would have been a perfect place to interject that, don't you? Really. I know. When I start talking about this, I can always see these guys reaching really slowly for their cell phones because they're going to call their sponsor and they're going to say, he said don't go to meetings. And I didn't say that. what I want to make sure that we understand, and we'll repeat this theme over and over and over again through this weekend, is this idea that the important part of our recovery is based on your experience with the steps, not the meeting. If you're expecting the meeting to be what it is that connects you up, good luck. I don't know what to say. I mean, you might be in a place where you got some of this stuff. The information that Chris wrote up in here, that body, mind, and spirit stuff, and the rest of the stuff about the outside issues, you might pick that up in regular meetings, but you might not. I'd been involved in AA for a long, long time before I heard any of it. I was 7 years sober before I was introduced to any of that. Well, sober is a funny word. I was 7 years in the rooms anyway, and you could ask my wife about my sobriety. It would be a little. We have two different stories on that. But when she introduced this, when I was introduced to this with a bunch of big book guys, it rocked my world. Excuse me, because now I knew and understood what it was that I was about and why I was there. In the beginning of this work, they talk about powerlessness. They talk about lack of power. That was our dilemma. If I could make the decision to not drink, I'd be great. If I could make the decision and then stick with it, it would be fine. The problem is I'm unable to do that. That's what lack of power looks like. If you understand, there was a guy named Paul Fisher that wrote an article. Some of you guys have seen copies of that article. This cat's in Arizona in the United States, and he wrote this article, and they talk about this thing as being the basis of what we do in step one. This thing about powerlessness. Excuse me. There's another hairball. I feel like a big cat. Much better. There's this deal about powerlessness, and they talk about this thing. If you're a brand new guy, I'm going to hold your finger on this thought. What I want to do is I want to back up a little bit. And I want to tell you why we're doing this. From when I'm doing this, I always want you to see this from the perspective of sponsorship. So I'm going to assume right now that everybody in here is ready for sponsorship, and everybody has a brand new protege sitting right next to them, just for the sake of the talk. That everybody, because this is where the vagaries of your program begin to show themselves in all of their vagueness. This is where we get into trouble, is when we start transferring this thing. It's like you may have gotten here a particular way, but when we begin to try to teach it to somebody else, that's when things get kind of... Let me tell you this fast story. We've got a second. About 5 years ago in England, at a workshop that we were doing, it was a men's conference for about 80 men. And we were talking before this thing, and I remember somebody had said something, and I went, well, we need to get clear on where we all are here, because I'm not sure that we are. And so I had a bunch of index cards about this big, just little white index cards with some little pencils, and I passed them out. And when we started the session, I said, guys, I tell you what I want you to do. If you would do me a favor, before you write anything down, let me ask you this question. Does everybody understand what you'd do with a new guy if he showed up? Do you men understand what you would do to start a guy? And everybody in the room went, uh-huh. Everybody. And I said, okay, well, guys, let me do this. Do me a favor. The card that's in front of you, if you just pick that pencil up and write down let's say the first 3 things that you would do. And see, let me see what those are. And it's amazing. I'm looking at the room from this perspective, and I'm looking at them, and like 3 heads go down. A couple of people picked up pencils, but most of the men didn't touch those pencils. Didn't touch them. You see, my head sells me the idea that I know exactly what I'm doing, and I'm okay. But when I ask you to be definite about what you're doing, all of a sudden things go wheels off. Now all of a sudden I'm kind of vague. So what do I do? Do I do this? But see, the new guy picks up on that. The new guy understands your indecision and your lack of confidence about what you're doing. I'm not judging you guys. I mean, I lived that nightmare. You'd start out okay, and then all of a sudden you'd see him lose interest, and you'd see him kind of vacillate, and he doesn't really know. And I always want to blame the new guy. Well, he just doesn't understand, or he doesn't know, or he doesn't want it. And the reality, guys, is even the rankest off the street new guy understands indecision. That's not me. Understands indecision when he hears it. And this is the reason why. I'm not trying to make us machines. We have to handle everybody differently. But the big picture ideas of how we qualify people, remember in the early days of AA, qualifying brand new guys was the norm. That was what everybody did. And yet now, if you want to get some guys rankled in a meeting, just mention the Q word. Just say anything about qualifying the new guy, and you'll have half that room pissed. They're looking for a piece of rope to hang you. You see? And it shouldn't be that way, guys. It should not. I understand it because everybody wants to judge. They want to set it up so that qualifying automatically draws the line to judgment. Why? We're not trying to judge anybody. We're trying to save your life, and we need to see who it is where we are. And if I can understand what your truth is, I can help you see your truth. I'm always unclear why we want to dance around this idea of seeing what our truth is around our disease. Wouldn't it be cool, guys, seriously, to find out that you're not an alcoholic, that you don't really belong here? Wouldn't it be cool to know that you could just go do your life? Guys, I'd be peeing on myself. I'd be so excited that I would. Well, maybe not peeing on yourself, but you understand. I don't want to know that I have a chronic disease that could kill me. I mean, a death sentence is a pretty scary thing to shoulder. And yet, unless you're there, unless you have that weightiness of who you are and what you are, I don't think that you're going to be able to work through this thing in any form of discipline. I just don't think you will. I think that you'll do what most of us do, which is just kind of play games with. And then your disease downrange will become a distraction. It will become it was probably just a rough time of my life. I'm probably past that now. I'm much more mature now. I have a wife now. I have babies now. You see what I'm saying? This is where all the indecision slides in, and now I can get really vague about my program. I can get really vague about my disciplines of 10, 11, and 12 and what I'm going to do around those things. This is not where we want to be. I want to be. I'll talk about this thing late tonight when I do story stuff like this profound experience of finally seeing who I was and what I was is an amazing thing, and it changes your entire focus of how you carry the message to the new guy completely, you see. So let's just pretend for the sake of this example that everybody in here has been qualified, everybody in here knows that they're a little drunk, and we're ready to move on through this other stuff. There's never any logical reason to wait. This is the part that always gets me. We used to, in the hill country, in Dallas, we'd hear all these guys going, well, I'm working on my second step. I'm working on, 6 months later, they're still sitting there going, well, I'm working on that old second step. Or it sounds like this, well, I'm having such a problem with God, I just don't know if I can do this second step. Okay. Let's clarify this. There was nowhere in our literature that said that you had to have a full-formed idea of what God looked like. It didn't say that. It didn't say that you had to have the doctrine in place, that you had to have everything all lined up, that the canon had to be all set in place and ready for you. It never said that. You're going to have two kinds of men and women coming into this deal. Guys that are okay with God and guys that have God sideways in their craw. It may be as strong as I hate the SOB or I just don't want to have anything to do with him, but they're still just two basic paths. So if you've got a guy over here that's okay with God, we're going to deal with him in one particular way. If you've got a guy over here that's got God sideways in his craw, we're going to slow it down a little bit, and we're going to begin to break down the barriers of prejudice that have put him in this situation. And I understand that, because that's where I was. I was raised in a Christian church, and I had God shoved firmly up my rear end for a long, long time. And by the time I got here, I was okay with certain parts of this thing, but as a general rule, I don't want anything to do with that part of it. And if I can avoid it, I will, you see. So Bill Wilson knew this. You remember, if you go back and look at history, Bill Wilson is a card-carrying agnostic. He'll concede that something's out there, But he won't go anything past that. He is absolutely adamant about that. And listen to his dialogue when he goes through this talk about God. He gets his back up. You can see him get his hackles up like this, and he gets real demonstrative about anything that has to do with God. Probably passed down from his grandfather. Remember, his grandfather made some shining remarks about Christians, and I mean, they jam it up pretty bad there, and so he's just carrying the tradition on, and so. And so effectively, chapter 4 in our book like this, it would be We Agnostics, is an amazing piece of literature. And for the first 7 years in AA, I never read it because I'm saying I'm not an agnostic, so I don't need to read that stuff, and I just skipped over it. And so what happens is, guys, is that if you end up with a guy who has problems with God. Go back and read it. Just go back and read it. If he doesn't have problems with God, you don't necessarily have to read it right then. Later, encourage him to do that. We would when we study. It's very possible and real that you could effectively do a step 1, 2, and 3 with a guy the very first meeting that you have with him. I know that drives some of you nuts. Well, we got to read the book first. Why? There's the question. I mean, I understand the thought process is behind it. I'm just wondering if the intellectual connection there, why would we want to do that? If we know our guy here is a drunk and he's brand new in the deal, and by the moment he's getting sicker, not better, why would I want to wait until we can arrange a time that I can read the entire book to him so he can make these decisions? Because if you'll notice the way the questions are written in the steps, they're black and white questions. You understand what I'm saying? Yes or no? Do you believe in God? Like this kind of, that kind of thing. Do you believe that there's something out there bigger than you that can fix you? Or Which is it? I mean, do you understand what I'm saying? What I'm trying to do is move the. Chris uses the example all the time that this is triage, that this is like emergency room stuff. There's plenty of time to go back and look at doctrine. There's plenty of time to go back and flesh out the full-blown idea of what I want God to look like and be like and this kind of stuff. It may be the God of my youth as a Christian. It may be the God of something else. I'm not here to judge any of that, guys, and I'm just here to the idea that I have to have all this formed becomes a real detriment to your ability to get busy doing this work. Remember, the clock ticks. Time is moving on, and I'm getting sicker by the moment. The guy that you're sponsoring is getting sicker by the moment, and so we need to begin this process of moving him toward. At the center of our program is God. We need to agree on that, guys. You can say, okay, it's the group, it's this. If this be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. If I have to have the spiritual experience to get clear of this, then perhaps I have to be willing to look differently at some things. Well, I'm not making light of any of this, guys. I'm telling you right now, I know some of you personally. I know some of the stuff that you came through to get here. And sometimes I want to weep when I hear the stories of men and women and how badly it was for you to get here. And that this idea of God would be sideways in your craw, that you would have trouble with it, is no surprise whatsoever. None. That's why I think that Bill Wilson and those cats wrote such an amazing piece when they wrote We Agnostics, because it does a great job of simply asking us to put aside the prejudice long enough to accept one simple premise, one simple idea, that perhaps there is something out there big enough to fix this deal. And it's not a big stretch. Once you begin to connect that dot, it's easy to be able to begin to study and to be able to move into other areas and to be able to see other things. And I have seen over especially the last 5 or 6 years, some of the most amazing transformations of men and women in this thing. The fact that they're sober today is pretty exciting stuff. But the fact that they've developed these amazing relationships with the God of their understanding and that they never dreamed that they could do, these are just phenomenal things. And we never dreamed that this would happen in our lives. Most of us, anyway. So this idea of a step 2 decision is pretty simple. And you could indeed do it at the beginning, at a meeting with a drunk for the very first time. You could qualify him as step one truth, ask him the questions for step two. He could make his decision. Yes, I believe that there's something out there that could fix this thing. Next, there was no sense in spending a bunch of time going through this other stuff. Plenty of time to catch up on it later, to get in there. It's not important in the aspect of the step itself. So then let's look at this third step deal. Let me ask you this question, guys. How many of you, when you read this book for the first time, or the second or third or fourth time, as you began to read through this, how many of you thought that this area of this third step, in our book it starts on page 60, 61, 62, 63, 60, it's 63 we do the third step prayer. I'm not sure where it is in your translation, but it seems so out of place. I mean, it's like it doesn't fit. Everything else kind of flowed. We had this kind of symmetry going. They gave us the steps on 59 and 60. And then all of a sudden, he gets off into this deal and he starts talking about self and the actor and all of this stuff. And I'm just going like, Bill, what? I think Bill's having some kind of psychotic break. He's just, what's he talking about? And why is it important here? And I wish I could tell you that I was smart enough that I figured it out right away. But it would take me years and years and years and years to finally connect up what it was all about. Because for me, from my perspective, it was like what they had done was they wrote the basic text, the manuscript, and then somebody from the back of the room said, "Hey, Bill, what's this?" And he holds up a little sheaf of paper, and Bill says, crap, I thought we had it all done. And he said, "Hell, just sit it right here," and he just sticks it in the middle of the book. That's what it feels like when you're reading it, because we're talking about alcohol, and then all of a sudden we stop, and we're not talking about alcohol anymore. We're talking about self. What the heck does self have to do with any of this? We're alcoholics. It makes no sense. You see? Well, come to find out, it makes all the sense in the world. And this is the deal breaker. This is, if you're working with a brand new guy, the guy sitting next to you, that's your protege, that you're just getting ready to work with, if your man sees this, there's a almost 100% chance that he's going to make it. If your man is fighting you tooth and nail about this, you've got a problem. You're going to have to deal with it one way or the other, because at the core of this guy's ability to recover is the need to understand his own selfishness and self-centeredness on a gut level. You see what I'm saying? And most of us just skip completely over it. We hardly even read this part for the most part. In the States, every once in a while I'll go to meetings in the States that aren't my home group. I'll just drop in on a meeting like this, and it's the most frustrating thing in the world, because they're talking about other things, and if I try to pull it back around, I'll say, "Why don't we talk about this? Why don't we talk about selfishness and self-centeredness?" And everybody kind of looks around like this. They don't know it's in the book, and so they don't understand where we want to talk about it. And I keep going, guys, seriously, remember page 61, 62, remember this stuff? The greatest line in the book, selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our problems? Come on. Bill was on a roll, guys. All right, look. Well, we'll get over to it. Let's just... I'm going to read. You don't need to turn in your book, okay, because it'll get real confusing. I'm just going to read this real slow, and I'm just going to read a couple of little pieces of this, and then we're going to talk about it. I just want to make sure that we kind of bring it up and see it. The first requirement is that we be convinced. I'm on 60 for you guys that have American versions on it. The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. On that basis, we are always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Okay, now for just a minute, I'm gonna move this over to only men, because I hadn't figured girls out. I'm swearing. I think girls are the same way around this, but I'm not 100% sure. I have a wife and 3 daughters, and they still freak me out. So I'm speaking strictly from a male standpoint here, okay? So here it is. The last time you were the stuff that we're getting ready to read, I want you to pretend that you're in a new relationship with a girl. Everybody in here, most everybody knows exactly what that feels like, okay? Peter. And I want everybody to remember this stuff and then look at it from that perspective. Because in other areas of our life, men, we can be real vague about selfishness and self-centeredness. We can disguise it. We can make it look like all kinds of things. But in relationships, it's first and foremost the plainest, and it's first and foremost the ugliest in these relationships and the way we treat women. Okay? So that's the reason I mention it, because it's the easiest for us to see. Now listen to what he just said. On that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. My motive in dating this new girl is good. It's pure. The motive is. Okay? And then they set up this picture, and they compare us to the actor who wants to run the whole show. We're trying to arrange the lights, the ballet. We're trying to do this whole thing. We're trying to set it up. And it said, if the show would be great if everybody, including himself, would be pleased, if they would just do what he wanted them to do. Life would be wonderful. Now, in trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be quite virtuous. Men, does this sound familiar? In a relationship with a woman, do you see this? He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. That's me. That's what I always wanted to be in a relationship. That's me. On the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. You bastards. How would you do that? I mean, but I'm telling you guys, let me ask you this question. Man, how many times have you gone to a party and started the party as one guy, and maybe during the night you switch gears? Maybe you're somebody else. They don't know. I mean, I used to go to parties and tell everybody I was a physician. I was telling everybody I was a doctor, until all these people kept coming up and asking me all these questions about their health stuff. You know, my pee-pee just fell off, and I'm just going, no, I don't. So I'd switch gears, and I'd tell them I'm an attorney. I don't want to tell them I'm a bookbinder. I mean, who wants to go to bed with a bookbinder? I mean, I want to be special. And so that's what we do. We play, years ago, Mark Houston and a bunch of those guys used to deal called The Circus of the Lies. I think that's what it was called. But it was a fascinating look at the stories that we tell ourselves, the personas that we build up for ourselves to make us who we think we need to be. You see? And it's truly amazing. And so it's no wonder, guys, that we get here and some of us don't have a clue who we really are. We don't have a clue. We've told so many lies. Let me ask you something. Just between me and you, it won't go any farther than this. How many of you guys have ever told a lie so many times that it became your reality? Half the girls in the room shake. I'm hip. Listen, it's an amazing thing like that. Listen, let me tell you a story. There was this guy who I sponsored for a couple of years, who was all of our conversations seemed to quickly move around to the fact that he was suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome, and he was this Vietnam vet, and he had all of this drama around there. So we'd start talking about the steps, and he'd start talking about Vietnam, and pretty soon the conversation, he just always pulled me back around in the thing. And pretty soon I'm just like, I'm right in the palm of his hand, and he's telling me all these horrible stories about the things that he did when he was in Vietnam. And I'm thinking to myself, not verbalizing it, but I'm thinking to myself, man, if I was as screwed up as this guy, I'd drink too. I don't know what I can do to help the guy. You see what I'm saying? Well, it would be a year down the road. This man's not making any progress at all. He's still a victim. He's still hurting. He's just not making any progress. He was like a brand new guy a year into the deal, and we finally decided to do another inventory. And we got through this stuff, and when I got into the inventory a little bit, I realized after about an hour into listening to this thing that there was no mention of Vietnam. And I went, I think if this was as dramatic as he said it was, that there would be some here. And so I started asking him some specific questions. The short of it, he'd never been to Vietnam. He'd never even been in the service. He smoked dope the whole way through it. He didn't. But he was so convinced, you see what I'm saying? He had told the story so many times that it had become his reality. It had become the picture that he painted of himself, and it's weird. And this is the reason I'm saying, guys, sometimes we get here. This is the reason why I think inventory is so important. The stuff that Chris is getting ready to talk about on this thing, because what it allows us to do is to. Somebody said one time, if you want to know who you are, set down everything that you're not. You see. And so that's what this inventory was about, that we could get to a place to where we could begin to identify what we really were, warts and all. Listen, it takes some courage to do this. This is why we lose so many people. If more people did third step with the knowledge of what they were doing, we'd lose them at the third step. But because we skate over it in the States so much, they usually wait and we lose them at the fourth step, because that's where you actually have to pick up a pen and actually do something serious, you see. But Bill and those guys, the way they wrote this thing, it goes on down. I'm not going to read all this. He says, is he not really a self-seeker even when trying to be kind? Well, I can be kind. I can be the man you always dreamed of if it'll get me what I want, you see. Because I am the center of my universe, and I'm telling you, everything revolves around what I want. And to the extent that exists, some of us can get really, really sick. It's crazy. It's crazy. Top of page 62 in our book, that line I just read, selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Listen, guys and gals, if Bill Wilson had asked me to write that, I wouldn't have written it that way. It would have read like this. Canadian whiskey and methamphetamines, that we think is the root of our problems. You see what I'm saying? Because realistically, guys, what I want to take everything back to the addiction. And how many of us, is there anybody in here that didn't feel that way too? You see, if I can blame everything on the addiction, then once the addiction's gone, then I'm going to be okay. I mean, imagine my surprise when I found out that the booze and all that other outside issue had gone away, and I was still a self-centered prick that pushed people and shoved people and did exactly what I wanted to do in order to get what I wanted. Now, that's a dark day for a lot of us. That's a pretty uncomfortable place to be. And so Bill and those guys knew exactly what they were talking about. They said, okay, we sober this man up and he's still dealing with a load of selfishness and self-centeredness. We're not going to make any progress. This is going to be pretty ugly. And then they continue, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. I won't read the rest of that stuff, guys, but you understand. You've read it yourself. Stop for just a minute and think about, in your own experience, men and women both, in your own experience, how many decisions did you make based on fear and selfishness that would later put you in a position to be hurt? Wow. I mean, like every decision? I mean, I can't hardly get up in the morning without making a decision based on self that would later put me in a position to be hurt. The thing of it is, I can't see it. I'm just thinking, you guys just got over on me. Y'all are all out to get me. And I never stop and think about the fact of the unkind things I said about you and the decisions that I made that later I would give you no choice except to retaliate. I treat women like they're disposable, like they're Kleenex, like toilet paper. I get rid of them, you see? And then I wonder why the drama around these relationships continue and why they're so amazingly ugly. The final thought during an inventory when I began to look at this thing and realize how I treated women, and then I wonder why they treated me that way. She left me for no reason. You see what I'm saying? But I mean, I carried that for years. That bitch, look what she did to my life. I never one time took a second and to realize, until the inventory that Chris is getting ready to talk about, I never ever took a moment and backed up and went, wait a minute. Look at all of the lies I told that poor woman. All of the deception, all of the half-truths, all of the weirdness that I brought into her poor existence. Wow. I know you guys weren't as bad as me, but I pray you weren't anyway, but it's an amazing thing to see. But once we can see that, once we begin to collect up this body of information that points fingers back to who we really are, authentically who we really are, holy cow, an amazing deal. One more quick thing and then we'll be done. If you flip over in our book to page 63, I'm not sure what it would be in yours yet, but where the third step prayer is, I want to point out one particular thing on this and then we'll move on. In the center of that prayer, there's a line in there that says, relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, and it goes on through. Most of you guys have seen that, right? Okay. It's interesting that in the prayer, this is another place where we're going, Bill, pick me. Let me write the prayer. Because I got a great prayer. Relieve me of the bondage of Canadian whiskey and methamphetamine. And some other things. But, I mean, you understand what I'm saying like this. This is the weirdest deal. One of the most powerful prayers in the book. And they don't address booze at all. In a book about alcoholism. Which brings us once more around this graphic illustration of how self played itself out in our life on this thing. Relieve me of the bondage of self. Let me assure you of this, guys. When I get up in the morning, the bathroom is right there. Well, that's a bad example. Right there. I don't want to point at anybody. Like this. And trust me, booze is not waiting for me when I get up in the morning. I'm not worried about the booze when I get up in the morning. Here's the distraction, though. Between here and the bathroom, self is waiting. And I can engage self and already be... I'll just ask you, how many of you guys have left a meeting on a Tuesday night, a spiritual giant? You went to sleep Tuesday night, you got up the next morning, and in 3 steps towards the bathroom, there's already something that doesn't feel right. You know what I'm talking about? There's always this kind of like this, and it just twists just this little bit. And by the time you go to the bathroom and you walk back into the bedroom, you're standing there like this, and maybe your dirty clothes on the floor, something's not right. It doesn't make any difference. It doesn't take anything. The dog crapped. It doesn't take anything, and all of a sudden, there's another click. And you go upstairs and you eat, or downstairs or wherever it is in your house, and you eat a bowl of Cheerios or something, and you're sitting there, and all my mind is already at work, already down the range, already to what's going to. You understand what I'm saying, guys? Self is graphically kicking your rear, and left unchecked, all kinds of things happen. By the time you're in traffic, you're flipping people off. You're nuts. You get to work, and it's this. This is the attitude when you get to work. It's like, come on, say something. Go ahead. I have a concealed carry. I mean, you is there anybody in here that hasn't been there and knows that feeling? And there was no direct reasoning for it. It's just that self reared its head and self dictates that I need to be treated a certain way in a certain time frame. And it never happens that way, guys. It never happens. And to the extent that I exert self, that's how much damage I'm going to do in sobriety. If you want to have a life that's peaceful, deal with the booze, and then deal with self, and then watch how absolutely groovy your life is. It's the coolest. Good time for a couple quick questions. If anybody has one. We all good? This is...
I'll take it.
Simon, you're killing me, man.
Andy,
you're killing me. I was looking at
you
Simon.
thought you were getting away. Andy, recovered alcoholic.
Hey, Andy.
Round about step 3, Myers. I'm asking the new guy on step 3, are you now willing to go ahead and do 4 through 9? Do it quickly. Are you suggesting I take more time on step 3 to talk about self?
That's a great question. It depends on how... Okay. There's at the point that we're doing this step 3, should we spend more time with this guy talking about self, or should we just, if step 3 is a decision to go on with the rest of the work, could we go ahead and just do it right there? The book has been clear after that in the following paragraph that we don't want to rush this guy through this, but by the same token, we don't want to just let him drift on this thing. I've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of inventories with men where we did steps 1, 2, and 3 in the very first meeting that we ever did. You can do that if you have a guy that's engaged and he wants to play and he's wanting to engage in conversation. You can get where you need to get right there. You're okay. If he's not sure, there's plenty. We'll back up some. Well, I'm going to set a meeting for him, but it's not going to be weeks. It's can we meet for coffee in the morning? I want to kind of keep some momentum lit under this guy, and we may talk a little bit more about this thing. This is, I will just say this as an aside, this is the reason why I don't like corporate third steps. In the States, there's a lot of groups that have gotten together and they think it's a great idea to corporately do third steps with a whole bunch of people. You'll get 60 or 70 people in a room and everybody will get on their knees and do a third step. Well, the problem is that, I don't know about you, but I'm spineless. I mean, if you say, will you eat this bug? I'll say, who else is going to eat the bug? And if everybody says, I'm going to eat it, I'm going to eat it. You see what I'm saying? And so what we end up doing is we end up building the rest of our program on an experience that we have not had. And that's dangerous to do that. That's the reason why. I may do qualifying in a little group. I may do step 2 conversation in a little group of men. But when we're doing a third step and we're getting ready to get on our knees and hold hands and read a prayer, I'm going to do it mano a mano, me and one guy, privately. And then we'll see. And that way, later on, if you do it in any other way later on when things begin to fall apart, and it will, he'll say that you rushed him. And that's not our goal. We're not trying to jam this down anybody's throat, you see. He's trying to get it moved. Good question. Thanks, Andy. Julia, it better be an easy one.
It sure is. Julia, recovered alcoholic. It's following on what Andy said. When I got to AA, I had nobody to help me, and I was listening to Joe and Charlie's tapes desperately and trying to find the places in the book, and I couldn't read and underline it, and I really could not understand that, being the actor and being the player. And something I listened to just said, say the prayer and go on. And as I filled in that 4th column of the resentment inventory and filled in my character defects and the other ones, I was broken. And I completely got that like that. When I read it before the prayer, I couldn't understand it. And somebody I listened to, a tape or something, just said, say the prayer and move. Now, next. And as I did that, it was the most awesome experience. I saw myself in black and white. And I hated it. And I knew I wanted to make amends. And I do a little bit like what Andy says, because I think it's a mystery until you put it down on paper and you say, hey, God, that's really me. And I'm willing to go on now. I'm willing to do 6 and 7. Take it. I'm willing to set it right. And now, as I try to do the 10th step, those pages make perfect sense. I see myself playing the actor again. I see myself trying to manipulate. And I'm getting selfish again. So my sponsor points me back, like perhaps you need to go back and look at 60 to 63. But I find them exceptionally useful now in the 10th step to see that my ego's rearing up again. And I'm trying to manipulate, trying to get my husband to do what I want or something, a lazy bastard. And I'm living on that page again. And it's not just for step 3. I find it exceptionally important.
Absolutely.
In sobriety. And I finished the question. That's a statement.
No, that's okay, but that's a great comment because but that's true in most of our existence. We're not going to 100% understand this stuff until we do a piece of inventory, and then once we do inventory, we begin to see it and connect it up and see. But the reason I think it's a great idea to talk about it ahead of time. It's like a nick on the side of a brand new car. It may be a little bitty one, but once you see it, you can't stop looking at it. But once we identify that self may play a role in this, then we start paying attention to it a lot. We start seeing that it could actually be an element in our downfall, and we're gonna noses rubbed in it in that inventory coming up on that stuff. We got time for one more, I think.
Hi, I'm Annette. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, buddy.
I'll have to take my question back to perhaps to the first step, and also this question was brought up yesterday evening. I've been working with women who are still in treatment or in outdoor after, and they have been very much influenced to work on what makes them drink and all of that. What do you do? Because I can make them see at least I can try and make them see their first step. But eventually they'll go back to, I need to work on this that they're sort of working on in their after treatment. Do you have any suggestions?
Sure.
Thank you.
The question was, if this question was raised yesterday too. What do we do when we're influenced? The person that we're working with is influenced by treatment, and they have ideas that they need to work on these specific issues around their drunkenness, and we get it all the time. I think that probably trust. You have one obligation to a brand new woman that you're working with, and that obligation is to give her as clear a representation of what our book says as we can give her. Now, she's 100% on her own what she decides to follow. She may decide that she wants to follow the path that they gave her in treatment. What we try to do is stay out of that because it's an outside issue. Our traditions are real clear that we're not going to get in there and try to mix this up real bad. Although we'd love to, everything in us screams, listen, you crazy gal, you're getting ready to get loaded if you don't listen to me. I mean, you could, but if you verbalize that, you put yourself in conflict with the treatment places and you may do her a disservice. What I would do is I'd hug her around the little neck. I'd tell her the truth as I see it in the text, and then she's going to play whatever game she wants to play. Hopefully, she'll see the wisdom in what you're talking about, and she'll come along and do what we do. That's usually the case. My experience has been is that most men will run the game the treatment set up. They'll run that first, they'll get hurt again, and then they'll come back and they'll say, now what do I do? And I will say, okay, look, like this. Let's take this other stuff out of the picture for a while and concentrate on this. That's what usually will happen. Okay? All right. Thanks, guys.